Hey everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to be going over a beginner-friendly big bag. Today, we'll be going over the Grace Market Tote from I Think So. Now, the thing that I really loved about this bag when I saw it online was the fact that you can fold it up, snap it, button it, whatever kind of closure you want to use, and you can close it up just like this. So when you're not using it, it's not just another bag that's kind of hanging on a chair, flailed around in the back of the car. You can bundle them all up like this, put this in a smaller bag, and then when you go to the grocery store, to the market, wherever, you have a few of them all nice and neat just like this. So I opted for snaps on my bag, and that's what I'll be using in the tutorial today as well. But you can use an elastic and little buttons as well. I highly suggest you use whatever you have. If you want to use Velcro, you could definitely use that here as well. So as you can see, we unbutton it, and this little flap here comes down, open it up. Here are the straps. I'm using the most beautiful canvas material. This is from Needle and Anchor. I will have a link for it down in the description of this video because it is so cheerful, perfect for summer. So I wanted to show you, once you open it up, you have this flap here, and then we're gonna put another little snap right here on the bottom. I don't know if you can see, but right there on the bottom, another snap, so that we can just snap this closed, and that way you have a little bit of a closure on the top without like a full zipper or anything like that. So let me show you this on, because she's a big bag. You know what, I don't even know if I could get the whole thing in the shot. Okay, so I'm standing up on a little bit of a step stool, and you can see I can't even get it all in the shot. It comes down to like my thigh. So I am 5'4" average build. I'm wearing it on my shoulder. I have a nice loop here for the armpit. This is an adjustment to the pattern. I will explain that in a moment. We changed up the straps just a little bit, but it hangs really nice right on my shoulder. It's very comfortable because it is a thicker strap. And then you can see it comes down to about the middle of my thigh. She's a big bag. So this is a bag that's really good for those larger items. And I'm not so much thinking like gallons and gallons of milk. Yes, you can probably fit maybe 3 gallons, maybe 4 gallons, I don't know, of milk in this thing, but I wouldn't suggest it because who wants to carry that many gallons of milk at once in one bag, right? That's gonna hurt. I'm thinking like the bigger things, like the big baguette or the big sunflowers, or if you go to, you know, a farmer's market and they have all those vegetables that have the stems and the stalks still on them. So I'm thinking more the types of items that are a little awkward in smaller bags. So this is perfect for that. You see, I mean, I would just load it up with a whole bunch of baguettes, honestly. This would be my bread bag. I love bread. This would be great for that. But you could put a whole bunch of those big things in here, some beautiful sunflowers. It's just a really fun bag. And it's not a bag that maybe you're going to use every single time you go to the grocery store, but it's going to be one of those bags that when you have an item that is very large, you're going to be happy you have a bigger bag so it's not falling out. You know what I mean? Whenever you're carrying the smaller bag. Now, I wanted to show you, I did make a second version of this bag at 80%. So when I printed the pattern pieces out, this is an 80% print versus the larger bag, which is print at 100%. And so you can see this is actually just a really cute, smaller tote bag. So I'll put this one on for you as well. And so what I was thinking is, even if you wanted to, you could make this smaller version, and I used vinyl for the exterior of this, so it's a little bit nicer. And you could fold up your bigger bags and put them in this bag. And then you have everything you need, right? I will tell you though, at the 80% size with the faux leather vinyl, I was not able to fold it up like I can with the larger size. So you really need this larger size to be able to fold it up the way the pattern has it folded up. Now, like I said, I did change up the straps just a little bit. So you can see we have a strap on the front of the bag like this and a strap on the back. This is actually made using 4 pieces of the strap. It's split in half. We will go through this in detail in the tutorial. I just wanted to give you a heads up. The pattern has this front strap come and connect to this back strap in the same way, which would mean when you wear it, you're gonna wear it with your arm right here. And this is a little bit too high into the armpit for me. I don't like that. So what we did instead is we just changed the straps so that we can carry it like this instead. It still folds up perfectly. It doesn't change anything on the bag. I think it actually is more flattering when you wear it, and it's easier to use. So that's the only modification we're really going to be doing. I will kind of guide you through if you want a bigger boxed bottom. This pattern is great to adapt, and I love that because it's a very basic, simple pattern. So you can change it however you want without actually destroying your bag. So I do think this is a beginner-friendly bag. There are no zippers, there's no metal hardware, no crossbody straps, no vinyl. You can use thinner material. I do suggest you use some sort of a canvas material for the exterior, just for a little bit of extra durability, especially if you're going to be using this for farmers markets, things like that. I think a vinyl you could use, but I think it'd be a little heavy and might be hard to fold up. So I would stick with a canvas. A cheap alternative to, this beautiful canvas here is just going to your local hardware store and getting some painter's drop cloths. Or if you have some old painter's drop cloths that you're gonna throw out anyways, just use that, cut them up, make a bag out of it. For the lining today, I will be using ripstop. It's a nylon material. I used quilt cotton here, but if you think you're going to be using this bag in any way where there's going to be moisture on the inside, I do suggest using something like a pull fabric or a ripstop fabric. You could definitely use waterproof canvas, but again, remember waterproof canvas is denser and thicker, so once again, it might make it harder to fold it up. I'm trying to keep this as easy as possible, so my suggestion is a canvas material. Just a cotton canvas material. You can get yardage of it inexpensive at various craft stores. Again, hardware stores, drop cloths. And then for the lining, I would stick with quilt cotton or pull or ripstop. So thank you so much to I Think So for allowing me to use your patterns in my tutorial. I love I Think So patterns, especially because they are very simple. They're beautiful structures, but they come together pretty simple and you can adapt them however you want. And that's my favorite. I love being able to kind of diverge from the pattern, do my own thing, and know it's still going to turn out cute. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section. I will have timestamps for every single step of this tutorial. It is a pretty quick bag to make. There's really not a whole lot to it. I will have a separate video out going over how to cut out these larger pattern pieces, as well how to incorporate a quilt block into that. So if you're interested in that, make sure you check the description down below. I'll have a link to that tutorial. Again, I'm trying to keep today's tutorial as simple and quick as possible. So we're just gonna be using one big piece of fabric for the front, for the back, for the lining, everything. Keep it simple. All right, let's get started. So before we get started, I want to show you how this bag folds up. So here's my finished bag. I'm going to unsnap it. And I'm going to just kind of straighten it out first. Now I'm going to take my flap and I'm going to lay it up. And I'm laying my bag out so that I have the lining part of my flap right side up, just like this. So it's on the back panel here. And I'm just going to fold down my strap just like that. And it can be messy, doesn't have to be perfectly flat. And then we're going to take one side and fold it in towards the center. We're folding this in thirds. Think about it that way. So just like that, kind of covering the strap. Take the other one, tuck that in. You can make this as neat or as messy as you want, as long as it's all folded in. And then we're going to fold this part up in thirds. So not all the way up to the top, but just halfway. And then we'll fold it up one more time, kind of roll it up like that. Take your strap, wrap it around. And then this is where we'll have the other snap. Snap it in place, and there you go. Folds up so nice. I love this. Okay, I love this pattern because there's really not a whole lot to it. You're gonna need exterior fabric, lining fabric, some way to close it all up. So for the exterior fabric, I am using this canvas material. Now this is from Rifle Paper Company. It's just a nice heavier weight. It's not waterproof canvas. Waterproof canvas has a plastic coating on the back of it. This does not. This is just a canvas material. I think you can use duck cloth canvas as well, or you can use painter's drop cloth. Anything that's just more of a heavy duty material. I wouldn't suggest quilt cotton for the entire exterior of the bag because quilt cotton doesn't take a beating quite as well as canvas does. So I would suggest this. And for this, you're going to need at least a yard. I would suggest you get 1.5 yards just to be on the safe side. And if you're using it as one panel, it needs to be all one cut. It can't be multiple cuts that equal a yard. It needs to be all one cut. For the lining, I'm using this nylon ripstop. Now this is nice because it can withstand moisture pretty well and it doesn't absorb it. However, this ripstop specifically, it frays so bad. So it's kind of a mess to work with. I probably wouldn't suggest this starting out. I would go to your local craft store and just ask for any sort of water resistant material that's thinner. So I wouldn't use waterproof canvas as a beginner for the lining of this bag because it is thicker and it might be kind of hard to fold it up. but you can use pull fabric. I think there are other types of ripstop fabric as well that don't fray as much as this. This is just what I have. And then you're gonna need some sort of a closure. So the pattern actually calls for buttons. You're gonna need 2 buttons and 1 piece of elastic if you wanna go that route. I'm gonna be using these plastic cam snaps and then this little handheld press here. I will have a link for all this down below. But this is great because you just need 2 female ends and 1 male end for this bag. So it comes together very quickly, and we actually don't even add the stuff until we're all done with the bag. So we don't have to worry about placement at all. We're gonna put it where we know we're gonna need it when we're done making the bag. All right, here's the other stuff. I mean, this is pretty much what we use in every bag. We're gonna need some bobbin thread. I'm just using this Gutermann thread I get from Joann's. I do prefer polyester threads for bags all the time. My needles today are gonna be Microtex 8012. I think that's a good standard size for bags. My top thread is once again going to be this Tex 45 variegated thread. I just happen to have it hooked up to my machine and I love it, so I use it constantly. Tex 45 is a thicker weight, so it might be too thick for your domestic machine. I do have a domestic machine, but it can handle thicker thread. I have a Bernina 770 QE. If you wanted to use a Tex thread, which is great, Tex threads are very durable, I would shoot for a Tex 35. And then some sort of a marking tool. I'm just using this Soline air erasing marker. I have my Kai fabric scissors, which are my favorite. And then I have a generous supply of clover clips. You could also use pins for this. And then I have my seam ripper and stiletto because I make mistakes. All right, next I want to talk about the pattern. So here it is all printed out, okay? This pattern was a little tricky to put together, so I want to address it. When you put this together, and I don't know if this was just my printer settings, it's very possible. I've had this problem before with other patterns and it's always turned out to be my printer. But when you print this pattern at 100%, it wants to go all the way off the page. So if you're struggling with lining it up, there are these little markers here and it says from this point to this point, it should be 3 inches. If it's not exactly 3 inches, that's okay. All right, I don't want you to be too precise with lining up these pattern pieces exactly. Okay, so like for example, over here, when I line up these sides right here, this bottom sheet is shifted to the right a little bit more than this top sheet. That's fine. Line it up as best you can, tape it together. That's your template. There's only a flap and then a larger template here that's going to be the exterior and the lining. So as long as you just have something that's around this shape, even if it's not the exact right size, you're gonna be fine. So for example, here are my pattern pieces all taped together. Let me rotate this. And you can see they're very big pattern pieces, but right here in the center, all these pieces of paper don't quite line up. It's fine, I just taped it. It's okay. Is it a little wonky? Yes. But again, as long as I use this same piece for all 4 pieces, the 2 exterior and the 2 lining pieces, it turns out because they're all the same size. With only 2 pieces like this, and this doesn't even have to line up with this one, you can make it whatever size you want and you're gonna be fine. So I don't want you to stress out too much if you're having problems with printing the pattern and getting it lined up. It just needs to be this shape. So from your lining material, you're just gonna need 2 of those bigger cuts for the main bag. So this is what it looks like when it's all cut out. When you trace this on your material, you're gonna lay your material folded in half and then trace out your pattern piece and then cut it, and that way it'll mirror itself and end up nice and big. So you're gonna have 2 cuts of that from your lining, and then you're gonna also have a flap cut from your lining. And then from your exterior, you're gonna want the same thing, 2 cuts from the large pattern piece and 1 cut from the flap. And that's it. I'm not interfacing anything today. Like I said, with the material I'm using, none of it requires interfacing. I suggest not interfacing if you're using canvas. You don't want this to be too thick. All right, so let's just jump in and make the exterior of our bag. Grab both of your exterior pieces and lay them right sides together, lining up all of the edges. There you go, and just flatten it out as well as you can with your hands. Okay, now I'm gonna grab some clips and we're gonna clip along the 2 straight sides and the straight bottom, because that's what we're focused on right now. So you could use pins for this or clips, whatever is easiest. All right, now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine. We're gonna sew along the clipped edges, so the 2 sides and the bottom, all at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch really well at the beginning and the end of every single straight edge. once you have these sewn together, now we're just gonna box the bottoms. So these are pretty small boxed bottoms, which is fine. But if you wanted this to be a little bit of a deeper boxed bottom, I'll show you how to do that. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna pull at these corners that are cut so that we can line up the sewn seams so that they're facing right sides together. And then take those seams and fold the seams in opposite directions so they just kind of hug up with one another. So I always line up those seams first, get them nested, and then I use a clip to hold that in place. And then I'll clip along the edge as well to get it as straight and flat as possible. So do this with the other one as well. Okay, so now I have both of my boxed bottoms clipped and ready to go. Now, the pattern calls for a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which is fine. But if you want a bigger boxed bottom, you could go all the way up to an inch seam allowance, and that will give you a nice big boxed bottom. However, remember, we're using thin material here, so it's not really going to stay very boxed on its own, right? Because we don't have any thick stabilizer to keep it flat. So I'm actually gonna sew this at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, maybe just over a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I found that that's fine, but really anywhere between 3/8 inch to an inch and you'll be fine with this. Just make sure you do the same thing on the lining. Okay, after you have those sewn, before you move on, let's just flip this right side out, and I want you to take a peek at your boxed bottom, because if it is just too small, you can fix it now. So I'm just gonna pull this all out. So I'm just gonna look at this. How big is this going to be with that? So like I said, I used a 1/2 inch. I actually like that. I mean, you can see this is the size of my boxed bottom. That's not bad. I think that that will work out perfect. Isn't this cute? Okay, so you can set this to the side. And now we're just gonna repeat that with our lining. So take your lining fabric and lay it right sides together. Once again, we're worried about the straight edges on the side and the bottom. This fabric's a little slippery, so it can be a little tricky, but I think it'll be fine. So once again, I'm gonna use clips here, and I'm just gonna clip along the sides and the bottom straight edges. So we're gonna sew along these 3 pinned edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, just like we did on the exterior. However, on this one, we're going to leave an opening. So we're gonna leave it on the side over here, and we wanna leave an opening to turn the bag right side out later. So you want it to be about 5 inches. I actually just kind of do a little bit bigger than my fist. Especially if you're using thinner material here, it doesn't have to be a huge opening. This will all squish in nicely. If you're using thicker material, definitely 5 to 6 inches. Use that as your opening. So now when I sew, I'm going to start at this top edge over here, and I'm gonna make sure I backstitch when I get to my marks. And I'm not gonna sew between these 2 marks. So I'm gonna start here at the top, backstitch, go down to the mark, backstitch, lift up my needle, go over, put the needle back down, backstitch, and then continue on making sure I backstitch at the beginning and the end of every edge. All right, we've got our 2 lining panels sewn together. Now we're just gonna box the bottoms. So just like we did with the exterior, pull on that cut corner so that your seams come up to one another. And just flip the seams so that they're facing opposite directions. And then clip the seam first. Kind of pull towards the bottom of that box corner so that you can straighten it out so it's easy to sew. And then I just clip along the sides to keep it flat. Do this with both corners. Okay, now we can sew along these clipped edges for our box corners, and just sew at whatever seam allowance you did on the exterior. So I did a 1/2 inch, so I'm gonna do a 1/2 inch here as well. All right, once your lining is all sewn together, you can just put this to the side. Now grab your exterior and your lining flat pieces. And if you're using elastic here, you're gonna wanna take your little piece of elastic, loop it so that the loop goes towards the end part of the flap, and the edges of your loop are along this raw edge right here, and you're gonna wanna baste that down centered on either the lining or the exterior, but on the right side of your flap before you move on. Since we're using snaps here, I don't have to add any elastic to this, so I can just move on. So I'm going to take my lining and exterior flat pieces and lay them right sides together. And then I'm just gonna clip around the entire curved edge to hold it in place, and I'm not clipping along the top straight edge. We're gonna leave that open. So now we're just gonna take this to the sewing machine and sew along these clipped edges at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm leaving the top straight edge open. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end here. All right, once you have this sewn, what we want to do now is just kind of clip around this bottom curve. So if you have pinking shears here, that's going to be really helpful. I'm just going to use my scissors to kind of space out these little triangles. So I just cut at an angle around one side, and then I flip it over and I cut at that same angle going back around, and you can see it creates these little triangles. And this just helps the fabric spread out around that curve so it doesn't get all bunchy and look wonky. It gives it a nice clean curve shape. So once you have that clip, now we can just take the flap and turn it right side out. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but this is my favorite turning tool. It's a metal turning tool. It's from So Sweetness. I'll have a link for it. But it has a more blunt, rounded edge on one side, and then it has more of a pokey edge, but it's not so pokey that you ever have to worry about this pushing and ripping your seams. So you can really get it in there. But like for this one, I just need the blunt end. This is a great, great turning tool. Just helps really push out all those seams. All right, once you have that all pushed out, you can take this to the iron and press this to get it super flat. And then what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch along the sides and the curve. So everywhere you sewed already, we're gonna top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Leave this top raw edge open. We don't need to close that yet. All right, here we go. Now we have our flap. So go ahead and grab your exterior fabric. Oh, and you know what? I forgot to put a tag on this. So before we move on, I'm going to quickly grab one of these bag tags, and I'm just going to attach it about 2.5, maybe 3 inches centered on the bottom edge of one of my exterior pieces here. So I'm just going to quickly top stitch this on. Okay, so I attached my bag label, and I'm actually going to have this on the back of the bag because when this flap is laying down, it's just gonna cover it. So this is gonna be on the back side of the bag. So with my back panel right side up, I'm going to take my flap and lay it exterior right side down and just center it on this little loop right here. Just right on the bottom of that curve. You can see on the bottom of the curve, there's this one straight section. Should be about the same size as the raw edge, flat side of your strap. So I'm just gonna lay them right sides together. And I'm going to clip this flap in place only on that back panel. So you can see I have my front panel underneath here. I'm gonna lift up that fabric. So I don't wanna accidentally clip it to the front and then sew it shut, because then your whole bag will be sewn shut and that wouldn't work. So we're just gonna clip it to the back panel. And now we're gonna sew along this line at about 1/4 inch seam allowance just to base this in place. All right, there we go. So now you can see if we lay this with the front facing us, when we close this flap, it'll go down just like that. Very, very cute. Okay, so now let's fold the flap back so it's out of our way. With your exterior right side out and your lining wrong side out, take your exterior and just tuck it inside your lining. So the lining and exterior are going to be right sides together. So this can get a little confusing with all of these straps and stuff everywhere. Just do your best, kind of go slow. Find those side seams, and let's line up those side seams of the exterior and the lining first. So just like before on the box corners and stuff, we're going to fold the seams in opposite directions. Folding the seams in opposite directions just helps avoid bulk. So I always start with that. And now what we want to do is go around the entire top edge of the bag, including the straps, line it up, and clip them together. So this could take a little bit of time. Make sure that flap is tucked inside the bag. Okay, here we go. I've got the entire top edge clipped. Now, before we sew this, I'm going to mark 3 inches down from the top of each strap. So whichever side's going to be facing up when you're sewing, mark it on that side. For me, it's going to be the lining. So I'm just taking a small ruler and I'm going to measure down 3 inches from these top raw edges of the strap, and I'm going to mark a line. Because I don't want to sew all the way to the top edges of my straps. We need to leave a bit open, and I found that 3 inches seems to work well. You can definitely make it bigger than 3 inches if you'd like to be on the safe side. So do this on all 4 straps. All right, so once you have 3 inches down marked from the top edge of each of your 4 straps, you're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to just sew along each curved edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So we have 4 places to sew. From the top here, all the way down around this curve in the front, up to the marked line. And then we're going to do the sides, marked line, down the curve, up to the marked line. Flip the bag over. And then do the same thing. You're going to do the curve on the back, and then once again the curve on the other side. So you have 4 places you're sewing from marked line to marked line. Don't go all the way up to the edge on the straps. All right, once you have the whole top sewn, we're going to turn this bag right side out through that side hole. So just gently pull your exterior out through that opening you left in the lining. And then just tuck that lining in. And I always like to put my hand inside to kind of push out those box bottoms. And then you're going to want to make sure you push out your straps. So find your straps. And this is where a turning tool comes in really handy, because you can just use that to push up in the straps. And if you're using a thinner material like I am, this should be pretty easy. If you're using a faux leather vinyl or waterproof canvas, this might be a little bit more challenging, just pushing out these straps. Okay, so I'm going to tuck my lining in, and I'm not going to close the hole in my lining just yet. I'm going to wait until I'm done with the top before I do that. I always like to leave that for last. So now this is where we're going to diverge from the pattern a little bit. Let me get this laid out. So if you lay out your bag so the front exterior is facing up, you'll notice you have 4 straps here, right? The pattern is going to have you take this front panel strap and then the strap behind it on the back panel and sew those together just like that. But that makes for a very awkward bag. So we're going to change it. We're going to take the 2 front panel straps and we're going to sew them together. And then we're going to do the back straps just the same way. So this is what you need to do. Take your front panel straps, so this should all be from the same piece of fabric here, and you're going to take your exterior ends, and then keeping it all as straight as possible, you're going to pull them nice and flat, and then fold them right sides together. So don't get anything twisted around here, okay? Keep it straight, and then flip them right sides together, and then just clip along that top straight edge, just like that. Now move this down, and we're going to do the same thing with the back. So once again, get this nice and straight, pull them up, and then rotate the exteriors so they're right sides together. So you might want to take your lining and just move that out of the way. Open up those short edges so it's nice and flat, and we can sew along the entire edge. Nothing needs to be folded in on itself. Okay, so now let's go to the sewing machine. We're going to sew along both of these pinned edges at 3/8 inch seam allowance. We're just doing the exteriors right now, and again, making sure everything is very straight. All right, there we go. So now you should see with the strap sewn, you have a circle, right here on the front panel and on the back panel. That's how we want the strap to be. So I'm going to rotate the bag to make it easier to see. So now I'm working with this top front panel strap. I already have the exterior sewn together. Move those out of the way. And now I'm going to grab my lining pieces, okay, and I'm going to fold those in right sides together. Now I know everything starts to get a little messy here. Just do your best to make sure nothing is twisted around. And we're going to fold the lining pieces right sides together along their raw edges and then add clips. So I've got this strap clipped. I'm going to do the same thing on the back. Just rotating my linings so they can be right sides together. Moving that exterior piece out of the way. All right, so now we're going to sew these lining pieces. And I'm going to sew these at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I actually found sewing them just a little bit bigger than the exterior straps helped with keeping it all nice and tight. Because we have a curve here, I found if I did it at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, my lining was a little kind of baggy and bunched up. So I'm going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, so you might find it easiest if you clip this seam for the exterior and the lining. I'm just gonna kind of finger press them open. And if you pull on this, you should see that the lining and the exterior will go wrong sides together and just kind of fold in on itself. So what we wanna do is flatten out the seam. So I'm gonna start with the exterior. And then we wanna fold it down to match the seam allowance over here on the edges. So this is where if you left a really big opening right here, this is going to be a little bit more work because now we have to match it all up. So I just fold it down to what I think is 3/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to fold down my lining as well. And it's a little bit easier if you kind of push out the seam that's already sewn just next to your opening and then clip it to hold it in place. Now what we do is just kind of pull on this and try to get it nice and straight. So you might have to fold down a little bit more in some places. Don't worry about perfection here. If it's a little of a wavy line, not a totally straight line, that's okay. Maneuver it and mush it around to get it to a place you're happy with. And there we go. And you can also use an iron here to help with this step. So I've got one side folded in and clipped. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. We just want these raw edges tucked in and folded down. So once again, I'm just going to kind of push out the sewn seam just outside of my opening and use clips to hold that in place. Now just depending on your material, this can be simple or not so simple. This ripstop is very silky, so it's kind of hard to keep it in place. But quilt cotton would be a great option for your lining because then you could just press your exterior and your lining with an iron and you wouldn't have to wrestle with this so much. There we go. So all I'm doing is tucking in those raw edges, trying to get this seam as straight as possible so that I can top stitch this when I top stitch the rest of the bag. All right, so you see how we have this strap done now? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around this entire opening right here for my bag. I'm just going to go around the entire opening and I'm going to use clips to press along the seam and get it nice and flat. So you see how I just kind of roll my seam out, get it straight, and then use some clips because the lining likes to kind of pull up and tuck the seam in. You don't want that. You want your seam nice and straight here. I just realized I forgot to clip around these curves before we turned the bag out. Since I still have that opening, here, I'll show you. So since I still have that opening in the lining, if I want to address these curves here that I forgot to clip the seam, I can actually just pull those out. So I know right here is a big curved area. And I can just take my scissors and just little clips right in the curve to help smooth them out. Nice and easy. So now when I go back and clip these curves to try to get it nice and straight before I top stitch it, it's a little bit easier. I'm not going to fight with it so much. So if you did forget to clip the curves like I did, you can always use that hole in your lining to turn it back out, clip those curves, and then come back to this step. That's what's nice about leaving that hole open until the last step. Okay, so here is this first part that I'm going to work on. This is that opening on the front of the bag. I have it all nice and clipped. Again, you could use an iron here just to press it. but I have it nice and straight, so now I can go around this inner clipped circle right here, and at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm just going to top stitch around the entire thing, and that's also going to close up the hole here on the top. Okay, so we have one section done. We actually just have two more because this big inner one is all one section. So that's what I'm gonna work on next. Since I already have the other side of the strap clipped and ready to go, that means I just have to prep the other strap as well. So once again, I'm going to use that hole that I left in the lining to just pull out any of these curved edges that I forgot to clip before I press them to top stitch. Now with my material, it's actually fine if I don't do this. I found that the curves still work out really well. They're not a super tight curve. My material's not very stiff, so it actually works out fine. But I just want to show you that you can always go back in and address these curves if you forgot. Like I did. All right, I think that will be good. So now what I'm gonna do is go deal with this other strap here that still has the raw edges showing. So once again, just to remind you if you forgot, I'm gonna fold the seam just outside of the opening, nice and tight. So I'm just pushing my finger in there and then pushing up on the seam so that I can bring it all the way out. It's not tucked in on itself. That just gets it nice and flat, so that way I can kind of pull on this, press open that seam allowance for the exterior, and fold it down about 3/8 of an inch. I'm just eyeballing it until I pull on this, and then I can kind of see better if I need to pull it down more or fold it down less. But again, this whole pattern is very forgiving, so if this isn't perfect, you're not even gonna notice. You might kind of notice at this step, but once it's done, you won't notice. The goal here is just to make sure none of those raw edges show up in the end. That's all. That's the goal. That's it. All right, I have one edge done. Let's do the other edge. All right, now that I have my strap all prepped, now I'm going to go around the center opening of my bag. And again, use an iron here if that's easier, or use clips and just roll the seam so that it's nice and straight. Doesn't have to be perfect. This does take time, but it doesn't have to take a ton of time. Okay, so I have this entire center opening of the bag prepped. So you can see it's all clipped around the edges just to hold the seam in place. So now I'm gonna top stitch around this entire center opening at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. While I'm doing that, I'm gonna be closing up the seams on the side of my straps, on both of my straps. Alrighty, that was the biggest section. So now all we have is this other little arm hole, and then we're done. So since we already have the strap tucked in, we don't have to worry about that. So now I'm just gonna go around the entire opening here, just once again rolling my seam to get it as straight as possible. When you get to your flap, you want your flap to be pointing straight up. So we're gonna top stitch over the flap with the flap pointing away from the rest of the bag. All right, now let's take this back to the sewing machine and just top stitch along these straps in this opening at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alrighty, all the hard part is done now. So your bag is essentially done. So you can see when we fold it so that the front is facing us, the flap will go over, the straps go up, Look how fun that is. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, so before we add the snap tabs, let's close that hole in our lining. We don't need it anymore. So I'm just gonna pull that lining out a bit. And then I just pull on the edges around that hole. Maybe tuck your finger in there and just push down all the raw edges. And then use some clips or pins to just fold down those raw edges. You don't have to worry that it's a perfect 3/8 inch seam allowance or anything like that. Just get the raw edges down inside the bag so that we don't have to worry about that anymore. All right, now we're just going to sew along the clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just shutting this hole entirely. So now that that is all sewn together, just tuck in that lining. So we want the lining to be fully tucked in before we add our snaps. So the first snap I'm going to add is going to be on this flap. So I'm grabbing my box of plastic snaps and then my handheld setting tool and my little stiletto here. Now I'm going to center my male snap on the bottom edge of this flap here. And I'm just gonna go about 1 inch up, or you could go 1/2 of an inch. Let's do 1/2 of an inch. I'm gonna go 1/2 of an inch up from the center of this bottom flap. And I'm just gonna mark a little dot. It's gonna be right on the mouth of my little tiger here. That's cute. So I think the color I'll use is red. So I need a cap. And then for this one, I want the male end. So the male snap kind of has a piece that sticks up. So the cap is going to go on the front of my bag and the male end is gonna go on the lining side. So cap on exterior, male end on lining, just for this part here. So where I marked my dot, I'm actually gonna use a stiletto. We don't really wanna punch a big hole here. We just want a small break in the threads. So I use my stiletto to just punch a little hole there. I'm gonna take my cap and just stick it through that hole. So this is what it's gonna look like on the front. I'm gonna flip it over and take my male end of my snap so that the part that sticks up is facing towards the top of the lining. And then I'm gonna put this in my press. So I'm putting it cap side down on the bottom of the press and then just holding it in place, giving it a good squeeze, not so hard that you break it. There we go. Pop it out. And there we go. So our male end is all good to go. Now let's install the 2 female ends. Okay, so I'm gonna flip my bag over so I'm looking at the front side. And once again, I'm going to reach in and I'm going to push out that lining all the way to the bottom corners because we're going to punch through the lining and the exterior, so we don't want the lining to be all wonky. Okay, so now pull your flap through and then just lay it over and kind of decide where you want the female end to be. Now I'm not really measuring anything here, I'm just going to eyeball this. So I want it to be able to open a little bit and still close. So I don't need it to go all the way down to the bottom. Maybe I'll just have it come up along the top edge here about 1 inch folded, so that way I'd have like a 2-inch opening on the top, something like that. And I am 100% eyeballing this. Let me rotate this to make sure it's straight. So I'm gonna just pull on my boxed bottom here and fold it up just so I can really see where everything is. So what I can do is actually just push down on this male snap here. And when I lift it up, I have a little bit of an indentation in the fabric underneath, and then I'll use my marking tool to mark it. And again, we want the lining and the exterior to stay together well. So you might have to kind of maneuver this. I'm gonna stick my hand in here because I wanna go through the exterior and the lining, but only on this front panel. I don't wanna go through the back panel. So I'm gonna stick my hand through, keeping my fingers out of the way while I do this. And I'm going to poke my stiletto through the exterior and the lining, only through that front panel. Now I'm gonna grab my cap, and my cap this time is gonna go inside in the lining. So I'm going to run this cap in through the lining, and I'm just gonna poke it through that hole. So if you look over here, my cap is in the lining, and then it's pushed through to the exterior. Now I'm gonna grab one of the female cam snaps, and this is more of like a bowl, and I'm gonna place it so that it's facing right side up. So now I'm gonna grab my handheld press, and if you're using thinner material here, this is going to be fine. If you have thicker material, you might have a hard time getting it all inside your press. but I can just smush, see, I can just smush my bag in there and then press down to close the snap cap to the press. Okay, there we go. So let's rearrange again. Now, whenever this flap goes down, it'll just snap in just like that. So that's for when we're wearing the bag. Now we have to do the snap for when the bag is completely shut, which is the fun one. So once again, before we get started, I'm going to push through my lining. Okay. So now let's lay the bag nice and flat. And so the front panel should be facing right side up. So the back panel is the one with the flap on it. And I'm going to kind of fold down the boxed bottom, since this box bottom is a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to take the straps and I'm going to fold those down, keeping the flap up. You can fold, and I fold it all the way down to the bottom of the flap, so where that seam is. And now let's fold one side in about 1/3 of the way, and then fold the other side in to cover, just like that, a little burrito. And then fold this up 1/3 of the way, and then roll it up again. Look how cute that is. And then we're going to take our flap and just wrap it around all the way. So for me, my flap comes up and goes over my logo and goes just above it. So I don't want to punch in the seam. So if I made this really tight, it would actually go all the way around to the bottom of the flap. And I don't want to do that. So I can loosen it up a little bit. And I want this to snap just below that seam. So I'm just going to kind of pull it up. Make sure that that will be tight enough, which it will be. And I'm going to mark where that's going to go, okay? So make sure you're using some sort of a marking tool where you're going to remember where your mark is. This is a little tricky for me. So once I have that marked, I'm going to open my bag back up. And I just need the lining and the exterior to stay put right where that mark is. So this one's a little bit easier because it's at the top of your bag. So I have my mark there. I'm going to use my stiletto to poke a hole right through that mark. Once again, I'm going to need a cap and another female end. So the cap is going to go into the lining, and it's going to poke through the hole and out through the exterior. So you can see the cap is in here on the lining, and then it's poking out through the exterior. I'll take my female end of my snap and just push that over there. I'm going to grab my hand press and just lay it in there. Again, the cap is always on the bottom, and then I'm just going to push it down to set it in place. There we go. So now you should have 2 snaps on the exterior of your bag, 1 snap on the flap. If you're doing buttons, you have your elastic here, and your button is going to go here, and then the other button will go on the front of the bag. So look how cute that turned out. I think this is a lovely, lovely bag. I love this. All right, you ready to see it? Oh, it's so cute. Isn't that fun? I love this fabric. This fabric, I've held on to this fabric for years, and I'm so glad I finally get to use it. This is perfect for tote bags. So again, it's a big bag. Let me get my step stool. See, I like that it hangs like that, and if I want to show off the logo, I can just flip it around, and now I have my bag tag shown off like that, which I really, really like. So this is what I love about the bag, because this is how big it is. A big, big bag, but this is how it folds up. This is fantastic. You make a few of these, you take it to street festivals, you take it to markets, you take it to farmers markets, to carnivals, to all kinds of stuff like that. Oh, to carnivals, especially if you have like state fairs coming up, and then your kids want to get all the stuffed animals from the toys. You can put those big stuffed animals, I mean not the big, but you know, the medium-sized ones in these big bags. I love that. Make a few of these, fold them up, put them in a smaller bag, and that way if you need it, you have it. If you don't, it's lightweight, it doesn't take up much space. So thank you again to I Think So for allowing me to film today's tutorial. I love this bag. This is a really fun one. I hope that you guys enjoy making it. If you're a beginner especially, let me know how it goes. The only challenging thing I think beginners might have are some of these curves. They're not tight, but if you just slow the machine down, you're gonna be fine. It does require a lot of material, so make sure you buy inexpensive material when you're trying it out. And then if you love it and you wanna make a whole bunch more, go ahead and get the nicer canvas material so you can zhuzh it up a bit. I think a Christmas version of this would also be really, really fun for Christmas markets, because I am one that spends way too much at the Christmas markets we have in the area, so I think this would be fun for that. Thank you so much for sewing with me today. If you make this bag, please make sure you post it on social media so I can see it, or you can send me an email. I'm jessica@OklaRoots.com. If you post it on social media, you can use the hashtag OklaRootsToots, or you can tag me. I'm at OklaRoots on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.